At 3:11 Universal Standard Time, the moon colony of Eryndor stopped speaking. No distress signal came first. No warning sirens. No desperate military broadcast asking for help. One moment, Eryndor was alive, a mining settlement of 300,000 civilians orbiting the gas giant Talus, known mostly for its ice refineries and terrible coffee. And the next, every transmission ended in the exact same way. Silence. Across human space. Operators stared at dead screens and thought it was a communications failure. Then the orbital defense satellites around Eryndor vanished from every scanner at once. Not destroyed, not disabled, simply gone, as if someone had reached into reality and removed them by hand. 7 minutes later, the galaxy understood why. Every public channel in known space was hijacked simultaneously. Civilian networks, military relays, private diplomatic lines. Children watching cartoons on distant colony worlds found their screens turning black. Traders in orbital stations froze mid-conversation. Even inside the Grand Assembly of Concord, the neutral chamber where 800 species argued, negotiated, and politely lied to one another, the central star map flickered out. A new image replaced it. Supreme Executor Vaylor stood beneath the burning banners of the Kharad Imperium, his armor reflecting the red light of a dying sun behind him. He looked less like a ruler and more like a verdict waiting to happen, tall, scaled, with four gold eyes and the kind of stillness only apex predators possessed. Behind him, in perfect formation, floated the largest invasion fleet the Assembly had seen in over 2 centuries. Thousands of warships. Enough firepower to turn planets into memory. Citizens of Sol, Vaylor said, and his voice rolled through translation systems like thunder forced into words. Your species has been observed. Your expansion has been tolerated. Your existence has been measured. He paused, and somehow that silence felt sharper than the threat. The result is disappointment. In the assembly chamber, nobody moved. Vaylor continued. You build hospitals where fortresses should stand. You send diplomats where conquerors should march. You mistake restraint for virtue and peace for strength. This galaxy does not reward softness. It devours it. Behind him, Eryndor appeared on screen. The moon colony. Dark. No lights. No movement. No life signs. A grave with an atmosphere. Consider this your first lesson, Vaylor said. The Kharad Imperium has judged humanity biologically unfit for sovereignty. Your colonies will be transferred. Your fleets will be dismantled. Your species will be pacified and catalogued. His upper hands folded behind his back. You have 30 standard days to surrender. Refuse, and every world you love will learn what silence truly means. Then the transmission ended. Across the Grand Assembly, the reaction was immediate and painfully familiar. Some ambassadors looked away with practiced sympathy. Others began quietly deleting pending trade proposals with Earth. A few of the older species simply sighed, because they had seen empires like the Kharad before, and they had seen species like humanity disappear. Near the center of the chamber, Ambassador Celis of the Oran Collective leaned toward the historian seated beside him. A shame, she murmured. I like the humans. The historian, a thin gray-skinned scholar named Darr, did not answer. He was staring at the dead image of Eryndor, not with pity, with confusion, because something about it felt wrong. Human colonies under attack usually screamed. They sent panic. They sent demands. They sent grief so loud it crossed systems. But Eryndor had gone silent too cleanly, as if silence had been chosen. Before he could speak, movement at the human delegation platform pulled every eye in the chamber. Ambassador Elena Voss stood. She was small by every standard that mattered to warlike species. Silver-haired, dark-eyed, dressed in simple diplomatic black with no medals and no visible fear. She looked like someone's professor, someone's grandmother, someone who should have been ignored. Instead, 800 representatives watched her as if the gravity in the room had shifted. She walked slowly to the central podium. No guards, no advisors, just one human woman approaching the place where civilizations usually came to beg. Executor Vaylor's envoy, standing near the outer ring of delegates, smiled with open contempt. He expected outrage, pleading, perhaps threats from a species too naive to understand extinction. Elena adjusted the glasses she did not need. Then she looked up at the chamber, and to Theron's lasting discomfort, she smiled. Not a frightened smile. Not a diplomatic smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they've just realized a fire is spreading in the other direction. Representatives of the Assembly, she said calmly, on behalf of the United Earth Directorate, I wish to thank the Kharad Imperium for its message. Confusion rippled through the room. She folded her hands. And I wish to formally apologize. Even Vaylor's envoy frowned. Elena's voice never changed. We are sorry for what happens next. Silence hit harder than any scream. Then, across every military channel in human space, buried beneath mountains, beneath oceans, beneath cities built over secrets older than modern governments, a red light turned on for the first time in 112 years. And beside it, on a forgotten terminal no one was supposed to remember, 3 words appeared. Extinction Memory Protocol. Active. For 12 seconds after Ambassador Elena Voss spoke, the Grand Assembly forgot how to breathe. No one shouted at first. No outraged protests. No diplomatic scrambling. No chorus of nervous. Translators trying to reinterpret what had just been said into something safer. There was only silence, vast and unnatural, stretching beneath the crystal dome of the chamber like the pause before a storm finally breaks. Then it shattered. Delegates erupted into overlapping voices. Some demanded clarification. Others demanded security reviews, as if a human apology had somehow become a weapon. Several species with fresh memories of Kharad conquest began transmitting emergency messages to their home systems. The smaller civilizations looked terrified. The older ones looked thoughtful. Executor Vaylor's envoy, Lord Captain Razek, did not move. His heavy armored frame stood near the outer ring of the chamber, his gold ceremonial blades resting against the scale back, his expression frozen somewhere between insult and confusion. He had expected fear. Humans were supposed to fear correctly. Instead, their ambassador had looked at the machinery of conquest and apologized to it. When Elena returned to her delegation platform, Razek intercepted her halfway. He towered over her, broad enough to block the chamber lights. Every inch of him designed by evolution and empire to intimidate. Around them, conversations quieted. 800 species pretended not to listen. You speak strangely for prey, Razek said. Elena looked up at him with the same calm expression someone might use while discussing weather. And you speak confidently for someone standing on a fault line. His lower jaw tightened. Your colony is dead. She nodded once. Yes. No fleet came to save them. No retaliation has begun. This time, Elena's smile returned, small and almost private. That, she said softly, depends entirely on your definition of begun. She stepped around him and kept walking. For the first time in his military career, Lord Captain Razek felt something he refused to name. Not fear, not yet, but the shape of it. Far from the assembly, beneath 12,000 feet of Antarctic ice, Station Hecate woke up. The facility had never officially existed. It was older than half the governments currently using it. Built during an age when humanity still believed extinction was most likely to arrive wearing its own face. Its corridors were carved into blue-black ice and reinforced with steel, so old no one remembered the original contractors. Dustless halls stretched for kilometers beneath the frozen continent, lined with sealed vaults, silent reactors, and dormant systems waiting for a future nobody had wanted to need. That future had arrived. General Marcus Hale stood alone in the central command chamber as the emergency lights shifted from white to red. At 73, he was officially retired, publicly harmless, and according to most public records, spending his final years restoring fishing boats on the coast of Nova Scotia. At the moment, he was wearing old combat boots and watching a war protocol older than his daughter activate itself. The central screen lit with a message, confirm authority. He placed his palm against the biometric glass. It scanned scars older than most stars on modern maps. Authority confirmed. Welcome back, General. For a moment, Hale said nothing. The room around him came alive in layers. Tactical maps unfolded across holographic displays. Hidden fleets pinged green across distant systems. Agricultural depots quietly relabeled themselves as munitions reserves. Civilian freight routes rerouted into strategic supply lines. Every peaceful thing had another purpose. Every soft thing had teeth behind it. He exhaled slowly. They had all hoped this would die unused. His father had trained for it. His grandfather had built part of it. Every generation had inherited the same quiet burden. Prepare for the day humanity was forced to remind the galaxy what survival actually looked like. Now someone had volunteered. Hale opened a secure channel. Across Earth, Mars, Luna, Titan, and 14 outer colonies, retired admirals stopped gardening. School teachers opened basement vaults. Freight captains rerouted ships they had pretended were civilian for 30 years. Entire families received encrypted messages containing only one sentence. It's time. Faces appeared one by one on Hale's screen. Old soldiers, young commanders, intelligence officers who had spent entire careers pretending not to be what they were. Nobody asked if the protocol was real. Nobody asked if this was necessary. They had trained for the day. The question stopped being theoretical. Hale looked at them all and said, "Eryndor is gone." No one reacted. That was worse. The Kharad believe they are teaching us fear. They believe humanity is a species softened by comfort, civilized into weakness, too accustomed to peace to remember what survival costs. He let that sit. Then his voice changed, becoming older somehow, carrying the weight of things inherited. They think we forgot. A quiet settled over the channel. We did not forget the oceans trying to kill us. We did not forget winter. We did not forget plague, famine, trenches, mushroom clouds, or the mathematics of extinction. We learned from all of it. We buried those lessons deep, because civilized people should not live with monsters in the basement. He leaned forward. But if someone insists on kicking the basement door open around the network, old soldiers smiled the kind of smile diplomats never should. General Hale finished quietly. Then God helped them. Across the galaxy, historian Darr sat alone in the assembly archives, replaying the Eryndor footage frame by frame. Everyone else had seen a dead colony. He was starting to suspect he was looking at bait, because there were no emergency launches, no civilian escape signatures, no thermal panic patterns, no chaos. 300,000 people had not died like frightened prey. They had vanished like participants in a plan. And as he zoomed deeper into the final orbital scans, he found something that made the blood leave his face. Buried beneath the colony's ice fields, hidden under civilian infrastructure and decades of false geological reports, was a structure so large it should have been impossible to hide. It had powered on exactly 4 minutes before the invasion fleet arrived. Darr stared at it. Not a shelter, not a bunker, something much worse. And on the classified construction file, sealed under a language so old most translation systems flagged it as obsolete, were 4 words. Last line reservation facility. Darr did not sleep. For 36 hours, he remained inside Archive Chamber 9, surrounded by floating walls of human history, while the rest of the Grand Assembly argued about sanctions, surrender terms, and whether humanity should be politely mourned now or after the first orbital bombardment. He ignored all of it, because the deeper he dug, the less humanity resembled the species everyone thought they knew. Publicly, humans were easy to categorize. They traded aggressively, laughed too loudly, built restaurants before fortresses, and somehow managed to turn every diplomatic summit into an argument about coffee quality. They were social predators disguised as friendly neighbors, annoying, warm, and usually underestimated. But archives did not care about public relations. Archives remembered, and what they remembered about humanity made Darren's hands shake. He started where every species did, origin conflict. Most civilizations had 1 or 2 defining wars in their early development, violent thresholds they crossed before building stable societies. Sometimes there were 3, occasionally 4, if evolution had been particularly unkind. Humans had thousands. Before they reached orbit, before they split the atom, before they understood their own oceans, they had already spent recorded history finding new reasons to fight each other. Territory, food, gods, flags, skin, water, pride. Sometimes because they hated each other. Sometimes because they were afraid. Sometimes because Tuesday had gone badly. They're an open military records from their industrial age and nearly close them again. Trench warfare. Millions of soldiers buried alive in mud, surrounded by poison clouds and artillery storms so constant that some humans lost the ability to recognize silence afterward. Entire generations fed into machines designed not merely to kill, but to exhaust the idea of hope. Most species would have called that the end of civilization. Humans called it the First World War. The title alone unsettled him. First, as if they had expected a sequel. And they had. 21 years later, they built one. The Second World War was not merely larger. It was proof that humans could witness horror, document it carefully, and then return with improved logistics. Cities vanished under firestorms. Entire populations were industrially erased. Nations turned science into mathematics of death. And at the end of it, when most species would have collapsed under guilt or fear, humanity did something their instill could not emotionally process. They split the atom. They discovered how to weaponize the architecture of existence itself, and then, after demonstrating it twice on their own species, built more. Not one, not 10, thousands. Enough to sterilize their world several times over. He sat back from the screen, staring at the phrase humans had invented for this arrangement. Mutually assured destruction. Mad. It was not just strategy. It was a species looking at the abyss, naming it honestly, and deciding to build a chair next to it. Durin whispered the word to the empty archive. Nad. And the worst part was that it had worked. For decades, they had balanced civilization on the possibility of instant extinction, and somehow continued attending school, buying groceries, and arguing online with strangers. How did you threaten a species that had normalized apocalypse? His answer arrived in the smaller wars. That was where the fear truly began. Because grand wars were understandable. Empires fought empires. Armies clashed. Logic, however brutal, still existed. But humans had perfected something uglier. Resistance. He studied conflicts where stronger powers invaded weaker populations, expecting obedience, and found the same pattern repeating like a curse. The humans who should have lost simply refused to do so. They fought from forests, tunnels, mountains, ruined cities, deserts. They weaponized patience. They turned roads into traps and kitchens into arsenals. They made occupation more expensive than victory. In one war, a global superpower with aircraft, satellites, and overwhelming firepower spent years fighting farmers with improvised weapons. The farmers won. In another, an empire armed with modern warfare spent 2 decades trying to break people who seemed to measure time differently. The empire left. The people remained. Again and again, humanity demonstrated the same terrifying principle. They did not need to defeat you immediately. They only needed to survive longer than your certainty. Therein cross-referenced Kharad military doctrine with human asymmetric warfare models. The projections were catastrophic. The Kharad relied on intimidation. Humans evolved inside predator ecosystems and still chose camping as recreation. The Kharad relied on overwhelming force. Humans had built entire philosophies around surviving while outnumbered. The Kharad relied on fear. Humans had spent centuries making jokes during existential crises. It was not bravery. It was adaptation. And then Durin found the study that finally made him stop reading and simply stare at the wall. Combat Neuroplasticity. A human military psychology paper, dry in tone and horrifying in implication. Under repeated life-threatening stress, human neural pathways did not simply endure. They rewired. Fear sharpened focus. Stress hormones increased speed, aggression, pattern recognition. Repeated survival events made experienced humans statistically harder to kill. Most intelligent species were born specialized for safety. Humans were born specialized for surviving things that should have killed them. They were not the galaxy's best warriors. They were something far worse. They were survivors who had mistaken adaptation for normal life. During open an emergency diplomatic channel to the Kharad Imperium. He knew they would ignore it. He sent it anyway. He attached casualty models, historical parallels, strategic breakdowns, everything. He ended with one final paragraph. You have not declared war on a peaceful species. You have declared war on a species whose entire evolutionary history is a rehearsal for disaster. They are not dangerous because they love war. They are dangerous because they have survived everything that should have ended them. If Eryndor was a trap, then your war has already begun. Abort your invasion. Do it now. He sent the message and waited. 4 hours later, the reply arrived. It was one line from Supreme Executive Valer's command office. History is written by predators, not archivists. Your concern is noted and dismissed. Durin closed the message. For a long moment, he simply sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the archive systems. Then, softly, to no one at all, he said, "No, not dismissed, delayed." Because at that exact moment, in orbit above the silent colony of Eryndor, Lord Captain Razek was watching his first landing force descend through the atmosphere. 200,000 Kharad soldiers. Perfect formation. Absolute confidence. Below them, the colony remained dark. No shields. No visible defenses. No movement. Just an abandoned world waiting in perfect silence. And for reasons he could not explain, Razek suddenly wished the humans had chosen to scream. The first dropship touched the surface of Eryndor at 1403 local colony time. Its landing struts pressed into frozen ground beside the Central Transit District, where 6 months earlier civilians had crowded train platforms on their way to refinery shifts and school children had complained about recycled cafeteria food. Now the streets were empty. No movement. No resistance. No bodies. Only abandoned buildings standing beneath the pale blue glow of Talus, hanging enormous in the sky. Lord Captain Razek watched the live feed from orbit, arms folded behind his back, while tactical officers quietly confirmed what every sensor insisted was true. No shield signatures. No military power grids. No active weapons platforms. No human life signs above the acceptable threshold for planetary classification. It looked less like a defended colony and more like a place civilization had politely stepped away from. His senior advisor, Commander Veln, allowed himself a thin smile. They fled. Razek did not answer. He had conquered 11 worlds before earning command, and had learned something most victorious commanders eventually learn the hard way. Surrender had a smell. Panic left patterns. Desperation left heat signatures. Refugees left trails. Even the weakest species made noise when extinction came for them. Eryndor smelled wrong. The silence felt arranged. Below, armored Kharad infantry spread into formation and advanced through the city center with disciplined precision. 4 armed soldiers in black siege armor moved street by street, plasma rifles raised, scanning windows, rooftops, sewer access points. Nothing. A dining table still held untouched food. A child's toy floated in the artificial gravity plaza fountain. An apartment door stood open, lights still on, as though someone had stepped outside for a moment and forgotten to return. It looked staged. Razek's jaw tightened. "Advance slower," he ordered. Commander Veln tilted his head. Against ghosts? Against humans? The first squad reached the old transit station at 1411. At 1412, the street disappeared. The explosion came from below. Not one blast. Dozens. The entire avenue collapsed inward as buried charges turned the road into a crater lined with sharpened industrial supports and directional fragmentation mines. Steel, ice, and armored soldiers were thrown upward in a storm of fire and screaming metal. 12 Kharad died before anyone understood they were under attack. Then the buildings woke up. Apartment windows that had reflected only empty rooms shattered outward with railgun fire. Walls split open to reveal concealed firing nests. Sewer grates exploded upward and small black drones launched from beneath the streets like mechanical hornets, firing, vanishing, and reappearing somewhere worse. The empty city became a machine designed to punish certainty. Contact. Contact everywhere. The battlefield feed fractured into overlapping panic. Squads reported enemy fire from impossible angles. Entire platoons vanished trying to secure intersections that no longer existed. A medical transport landed in what sensors marked as a safe zone and detonated before the doors opened. Razek stepped closer to command display. How many defenders? His tactical officer hesitated. We do not know. That answer was unacceptable. He watched Kharad's shock troops push toward the central government district, only to trigger a second trap. The buildings there had been evacuated weeks ago and structurally weakened in advance. When heavy infantry entered, remote charges collapsed 3 towers inward, burying soldiers beneath 10,000 tons of engineered rubble. And still, no clear enemy line, no banner, no front, only the constant pressure being watched by something that refused to stand still. On the surface, Sergeant Mara Quinn smiled without humor as another Kharad walker stepped exactly where she had hoped it would. From her concealed position inside what used to be a public library, she pressed the trigger. The street beneath the walker opened like a mouth. The machine vanished into darkness, followed by a thunderclap that shook dust from the ceiling. Around her, her strike team moved with quiet efficiency. Teachers, mechanics, students, former logistics staff, people that Kharad would never have classified as soldiers because they still imagined war was something announced by uniforms. They had been preparing for this colony's death for 23 years. Every school basement connected to a tunnel. Every civilian tram route doubled as a supply artery. Every apartment district had overlapping fallback positions. Humanity had not defended Eryndor because it was strategically perfect. They defended it because it was ordinary, and ordinary things were worth bleeding for. Her comms crackled. South District breach. Need reroute. Copy, Mara said. Push them toward the reactor corridor. Still using the old maintenance map? She reloaded her rifle. They invaded our house. Let's show them the plumbing. Above the colony, Razek's casualty numbers climbed. 3,000, 6,000, 9,000 in less than 2 hours. This was not resistance. This was education. The humans were teaching his army how little they understood about prey. He ordered aerial bombardment. Gunships descended to the cloud layer and unleashed plasma across suspected firing zones. Entire city blocks vanished under precision strikes. Towers fell. Streets became molten scars. For 6 glorious minutes, Kharad Command believed they had restored control. Then the ground troops entered the rubble. The humans had already moved. The destroyed buildings were secondary traps, structural collapse zones, heat trigger mines, narrow kill funnels built to force armored soldiers into predictable movement patterns. Even the debris was hostile. A gunship pilot screamed as his craft was hit from below by a missile launched from a subway tunnel that should not have had launch clearance. Another disappeared into electronic static as human hackers hijacked targeting systems and turned friendly support into orbital confusion. Commander Velen stared at the incoming reports. Scales pale. This is not military doctrine. Razek looked at the burning city below. No, he said quietly. It's memory. As if to prove the point, every Kharad battlefield frequency suddenly filled with sound. At first, static, then music. Old human war songs, aggressive and pounding like marching thunder, blasted directly into command channels. Between them came something worse. Recorded Kharad distress, calls looped back at perfect clarity. Screams, final transmissions, soldiers begging for extraction that would never come. And beneath it all, one calm human voice repeating in flawless Kharadic, "You were warned. You were warned. You were warned." For the first time since the invasion began, Lord Captain Razek understood that Eryndor had never been the target. His army was. And somewhere beneath that dead colony, behind all the traps and silence and impossible preparation, something much larger was still waiting. He turned to orbital command. Find me what they are protecting. Before anyone could answer, every long-range scanner on the flagship lit up at once. 100 new contacts. Then 500. Then more. Cold signatures. Hidden ships. Emerging from the asteroid belt beyond Talus, like predators rising from deep water. Human fleet confirmed. For 3 full seconds, no one on the Kharad flagship spoke. The asteroid belt beyond Talus had always been marked as strategically relevant. An untidy ring of ice, nickel, and dead rock useful only to miners and smugglers with bad insurance. Kharad scanners had passed over it dozens of times during approach and found nothing worth concern. Now it was opening like a wound. One by one, human warships emerged from the debris field with engines running cold and weapons already locked. They had been there for weeks, drifting between asteroids with power signatures masked beneath the thermal noise of the belt, waiting with the kind of patience predators usually reserve for winter. Razek stared at the tactical display as the red enemy markers multiplied, not charging, positioning. They were not meeting his fleet in glorious frontal battle. They were arranging a lesson. At the center of the formation, the human flagship moved forward with unnerving calm. U.S. resolve. No decorative armor. No oversized weapon arrays meant to impress enemies before killing them. It was built like a tool, not a monument, dark, angular, and carrying the quiet confidence of something that did not need to announce itself. On its bridge, Admiral Naomi Sato stood with one hand resting on the tactical rail, watching the Kharad fleet unfold across holographic space. She was 46, sharp-eyed, and had the kind of stillness that frightened junior officers more than shouting ever could. Around her, the bridge moved in disciplined silence. No panic, no speeches, only preparation. Her operations officer glanced up. Enemy fleet still outnumbers us 6-1. Naomi nodded once. Good. Arrogant scales with numbers. A few tired smiles moved across the bridge. She looked at the display of Eryndor below. Burning districts. Shifting ground battles. Civilians turned offenders, buying time with blood and memory. Then she gave the order. Pattern strike. Let them keep their formation. We'll remove the reasons it works. Human ships split immediately, not forward but sideways, breaking into smaller groups and vanishing behind drifting rock fields and debris shadows. To Kharad doctrine, it looked like hesitation. To Naomi, it looked like mathematics. Razek watched them scatter and felt relief for exactly 14 seconds. Then the first kinetic strike hit. No dramatic plasma exchange. No warning flare. Just a tungsten rod accelerated to a fraction of light speed, crossing vacuums so fast the sensors registered destruction before they registered launch. A Kharad cruiser vanished through the center line. Then another. Then 5 more. Mass and velocity did what pride could not. Entire sections of the outer formation broke apart in silence. Ships torn open as if the universe itself had decided they were structurally offensive. Alarms flooded the flagship. Source unknown. Impossible firing angle. Starboard defense wing collapsing. Razek slammed a claw against the command rail. Tracked them. But the humans were already moving. Drone vessels, empty, cheap, and built to die convincingly, rushed one flank, drawing Kharad heavy fire and forcing defensive pivots. Real strike ships slipped beneath the formation from below orbital plane, using the confusion to hammer vulnerable support carriers and communications relays. It was not a battle. It was disassembly. Every Kharad response created another opening. Every correction arrived exactly where the humans expected it. Naomi watched the enemy formation distort. Rigid doctrine was beautiful until someone taught it to bend. Then it snapped. Electronic warfare online. Her signals officer reported. Blanket them. Across the void, human warfare suites flooded Kharad command frequencies with layered static, false telemetry, and ghost signatures. Ships lost formation integrity. Captains received contradictory orders. 2 cruisers fired on each other after both were convinced the other had been compromised. Confusion spread faster than damage. Razek realized with cold clarity that he was not fighting superior firepower. He was fighting superior preparation. They had studied Kharad warfare. Not generally. Personally. Someone had spent decades learning exactly how his people thought, how they maneuvered, where their pride overruled caution, and they had built a military religion around exploiting it. On Eryndor's surface, the pressure eased as orbital support collapsed. Sergeant Mara Quinn leaned against shattered concrete, blood on her sleeve as she was pretending to belong to someone else, and watched enemy dropships begin emergency extraction patterns. "They're pulling back," one of her team said. Mara shook her head. "No, they're trying to remember how retreat works." Her comms lit with command traffic from orbit. Human naval superiority increasing. Enemy command destabilized. Hold positions. She smiled for the first time in hours. Above them, the war was turning. But the true twist arrived not with destruction. It arrived with mercy. 3 hours into the battle, Naomi Sato gave an order so strange her own bridge crew went silent. Disable escape lanes. Her weapons officer frowned. "You want them trapped?" "No, Naomi said, I want them to run. She highlighted specific corridors to the battle map. Narrow routes leading safely away from Eryndor, obvious enough to be noticed, vulnerable enough to look like oversight. Leave them one clean path home. Understanding spread slowly, not annihilation. Message delivery. When the remaining Kharad ships broke formation and fled to the corridor, human forces let them go. No pursuit, no final strike, no heroic extermination. Only enough destruction to make the survivors unforgettable. And aboard those retreating ships were thousands of captured Kharad soldiers taken alive from the surface. Fed, treated, released. Each one sent home carrying battlefield footage, casualty records, and one recorded message from a United Earth Directorate. No threats, no boasting, just facts. This is how easily we could have buried all of you. We chose not to. Tell your empire to ask itself why. When the first survivors reached Kharad space, fear traveled faster than the ships. For the first time in generations, soldiers whispered that maybe the Imperium could bleed. On conquered worlds, enslaved species watched leaked footage of Kharad troops running from humans they had called weak. And something dangerous began to spread. Not hope. Hope was too soft. Permission in the Grand Assembly. Historian Durin watched the transmissions and understood the real battlefield had moved. Humanity was no longer defending colonies. They were dismantling belief. The myth that empires were inevitable. The myth that predators could not be hunted. The myth that mercy belonged only to the powerless. And on the throne world of the Kharad Imperium, Supreme Executor Vaylor stood in silence as returned prisoners knelt before him, alive when they should have been corpses. One of them looked up and whispered the words no conqueror should ever hear from his own soldiers. They let us come back. Vaylor stared at him. For the first time in 2 centuries of war, he felt something he had once considered biologically beneath him, uncertainty, and instead of choosing caution, he chose rage. Supreme Executor Vaylor did not destroy the returning soldiers. Many expected him to. The Kharad Imperium had been built on a simple rule. Failure was contagious, and fear spread fastest through survivors. Public execution would have been clean, traditional, reassuring. It would have restored order. Instead, Vaylor dismissed the chamber, stood alone beneath the black banners of conquest, and watched the battlefield recordings until room felt too small for his anger. Again and again, human ships emerging from stone and silence. Human civilians fighting like buried weapons. Human commanders choosing mercy with the confidence of creatures who knew exactly how much cruelty they were withholding. He hated that most of all. Mercy implied superiority. Mercy said we could have ended you. Mercy made conquest feel like begging. By the 9th replay, Vaylor understood the truth his generals were still trying to avoid. This was no border war. Humanity was not resisting annexation. Humanity was preparing an extinction response. And extinction responses were not negotiated with. He summoned the High War Council. Generals arrived from across 200 systems. Admirals stepped into the chamber, still carrying fleet dust on their uniforms. Intelligence directors brought casualty projections they hoped would be called exaggerated. None were. At the center of the chamber, Vaylor stood before a projection of Soul. Earth, blue, small, offensively alive. This species, he said, has mistaken survival for equality. No one interrupted. They believe because they have bloodied us, they have changed the order of nature. They believe history bends toward resilience instead of strength. He turned slowly. Correct them. General Terex, oldest living architect of Kharad's siege doctrine, bowed his head slightly. What scale of correction, Executor? Vaylor's eyes never left Earth. Total. The room changed, because everyone there understood what that meant. Not occupation, not subjugation. Finality. 3 hours later, hidden shipyard began opening across the Imperium. Reserve fleets older than most civilizations were pulled from deep storage. Planetary siege platforms activated for the first time in centuries. And beneath the desert moon of Karvas, inside a vault built for the kind of weapon species pretend they would never use, the Oblivion Spear came online. It was not a planet cracker. Planet crackers were crude. They shattered worlds loudly. The spear was quieter. a directed gravitational lance designed to destabilize a biosphere from the inside. Oceans poisoned by tectonic collapse. Magnetic fields shredded. Atmospheres slowly turned hostile. No dramatic explosion. Just a world becoming impossible to live on. A species watching its own future suffocate. Earth had been selected not for tactical necessity, but for symbolism. Vaylor wanted humanity to witness helplessness. He wanted them to understand silence. Across Allied systems, panic spread before confirmation even arrived. Encrypted sources reported impossible mobilization. Rebel networks intercepted references to extinction-class deployment. Entire neutral governments began quietly relocating archives and children. In the Grand Assembly, people stopped asking whether humanity could win. They started asking what would be left if either side did. At Station Hecate, General Marcus Hale stared at the incoming intelligence with the expression of a man being proven right in the worst possible way. Around him, command staff moved with increasing urgency. Fleet positions shifted. Emergency projections bloomed red across the room. A junior analyst finally asked a question no one wanted to say aloud. If they fire the spear, can we stop it? Silence. Hale answered honestly. Not conventionally. That was the terrifying part. Human fleets could beat Kharad fleets. They could bleed empires. But the spear was not designed for battle. It was designed for certainty. One shot, one world, no second chances. Admiral Naomi Sato stood beside him, arms folded, eyes fixed on the projection. So we don't stop the weapon, she said. We stop permission. Hale nodded once. Years ago, long before first contact, humanity had built war plans for backslash. Enemies they had never met. Not because they expected invasion, but because history had taught them something simple. Eventually, someone always decides peace is inefficient. One of those plans had a name few people were ever meant to hear. Needle fall, not fleet assault, not heroic defense. A knife, small enough to be ignored, sharp enough to change history. Hale turned to the room. The spear requires manual authorization from the executor's bloodline and direct synchronization from its command lattice. Remote sabotage won't hold. Orbital assault won't reach it in time. He expanded the tactical map. Deep inside Karvas, buried beneath planetary shields and enough military hardware to start a religion, sat the control citadel. To reach it would require stealth insertion through enemy territory, planetary infiltration, internal sabotage, and an exit strategy based mostly on optimism and lies. No one in the room smiled. Good. This was not a smiling mission. Naomi looked at the map. How many? Hale answered. 12. Not soldiers. Specialists. Ghosts. People trained for operations. So, quiet history often forgot to record them. Demolitions. Linguistics. Cyber warfare. Surgical violence. And one commander, Captain Elias Rook, when they brought him into the briefing room. He looked disappointingly ordinary. 38 tired eyes, unremarkable posture, the face of someone who could disappear in any crowd and had probably done so on purpose. He listened without interruption. No dramatic speeches. No patriotic declarations. Just a map, the mission, and the probability of not returning. When Hale finished, Rook studied the image of Earth for a long moment. Then he asked the only question that mattered. How much time? 6 days until firing position. He nodded. Then we have 5. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Confident. Rook gave the smallest shrug. No. Efficient. Panic wastes oxygen. A few exhausted people in the room laughed despite themselves. That helped. Before leaving, he paused by the exit and looked back at Hale. If this fails, the old general met his eyes. Then Earth survives long enough to make sure they regret success. Rook accepted that answer, because that was humanity in its purest military form, not optimism. Consequence. Hours later, a cargo vessel with forged carrier credentials drifted quietly away from Allied space, carrying 12 humans inside a container full of maintenance equipment that was only maintenance equipment if nobody asked better questions. Its destination, Karvas. Its mission, stop the end of the world. Its survival odds, impolite. And somewhere above Earth, children still went to school Oceans still move with the moon, and billions of people lived ordinary lives because no one had told them yet how close history was leaning over the edge. The cargo vessel entered Kharad space without incident. That was the first thing Captain Elias Rook hated about it. Successful infiltrations were supposed to feel clever, precise, satisfying. Instead, they felt like waiting inside a lie and hoping no one noticed it breathing. For 4 days, his team drifted deeper into enemy territory disguised as industrial maintenance contractors servicing outer relay stations. Their forward credentials were perfect, their accents practiced, their uniforms offensively believable. It still felt wrong. War should have noise. This had paperwork. From the hidden operations compartment behind stacked reactor parts, Rook watched Kharad patrol routes update across the tactical display, while Specialist Hannah Ivers quietly rewrote customs verification chains faster than most governments process tax records. "Still clear," she said. "That worries me," Rook replied. She smirked without looking up. "You complain if they notice us too. I'd respect it more." Outside the hull, Karvos grew larger. The moon was ugly in a way military planets often were. Scarred deserts, artificial oceans for cooling systems, orbital guns thick enough to qualify as architecture. Beneath its crust sat the Oblivion Spear command lattice, wrapped in enough armor to survive civilizational regret. And somewhere inside, the authorization chain that could erase Earth. Their objective was brutally simple. Break the chain before Vaylor gave the order. Simple was often another word for fatal. Back in human space, simplicity was dying. The Kharad main armada had begun final advance. 40,000 warships crossing the dark in organized silence. Enough metal and firepower to make prediction models emotionally offensive. Allied fleets repositioned desperately. Rebel forces struck supply lines like insects biting a storm. But everyone understood the same truth. If the spear fired, fleet victory would become irrelevant. You could not liberate a dead homeworld. At Station Hecate, Admiral Naomi Sato stood before the full Allied command and watched fear try very hard to disguise itself as strategy. Some argued for immediate assault on the spear with every available ship. Others wanted total evacuation protocols for Earth's population, as if billions of people could be relocated like office furniture. A few said nothing because silence was easier than admitting helplessness. General Marcus Hale let them speak. Then he shut the room down with one sentence. "We are not planning how to survive Earth's death." Silence. He stepped forward slowly. "We are planning how to prevent it." The hollow display shifted to Earth. Blue. Calm. Everything worth being difficult for. "We built these protocols because we knew one day someone would come believing extermination was strategy. We did not prepare to negotiate with that mindset. We prepared to outlive it." He looked around the room. "If Rook succeeds, this becomes a war." He paused. "If he fails, it becomes a promise." No one asked what that meant. They all knew. Humanity's final doctrine had existed long before aliens arrived, buried beneath policy and law like a knife wrapped in velvet. We do not start extinction wars. We end them. On Karvos, Rook's team entered the command citadel disguised as infrastructure repair staff, responding to thermal irregularities deliberately created by Hannah 6 hours earlier. Nothing moved faster than bureaucracy with permission to panic. The citadel was colder than expected. No banners, no grand architecture, just clean military geometry and the oppressive confidence of a place built by people certain no enemy would ever stand inside it. Rook hated those places most. Arrogance always left blind spots. They moved in pairs through maintenance corridors and shield conduits, placing silent charges and inserting code spikes into security relays. Every step mattered. Every second was borrowed. Specialist Dev Malik reached the inner lattice first. "Main sync chamber confirmed," he whispered through comms. "But we have a problem." Rook already disliked the sentence. "Define." "Executor override is active." That stopped him. Vaylor had arrived personally. Of course he had. Predators love front row seats to extinction. The original mission had been sabotage and escape. Now it had become sabotage and prayer. Rook stared at the schematic. If Vaylor was inside the central chamber, manual detonation would trigger immediate lockdown. No extraction. No second attempt. Hannah's voice came through, Quieter now. We can still collapse partial systems. Delay the firing. How long? Hours. Maybe. Not enough. Earth needed certainty, not maybe. Rook made the decision before anyone could argue. Continue primary objective. Silence answered him. They all understood. No one protested. That was a cruelty of good teams. They made sacrifice efficient, far above Karvas. The Kharad Armada entered final firing range of the Sol perimeter. Across Earth, official broadcasts finally changed tone. Schools closed. Emergency shelters opened. People looked at the sky with the strange, calm humans often reserved for moments too large to emotionally process in real time. There was fear, yes, but not panic. Earth had seen enough history to know panic was just inefficient grief. Ambassador Elena Voss stood in the United Earth Assembly Chamber and addressed a planet that understood more than most species ever would. She did not offer false reassurance. She offered truth. For all of recorded history, she said, humanity has been asked the same question in different languages. Can you survive this? War asked it. Disease asked it. The cold, the ocean, the dark between stars. Always the same question. Always the same answer. She looked directly into the broadcast lens. We are still here. Across homes, shelters, military stations, hospitals, and orbitals, billions listened. We do not survive because we are the strongest species. We survive because when extinction knocks, we answer together. Her voice sharpened. And if the Kharad Imperium believes fear makes us smaller, then they have misunderstood our entire history. At the edge of Sol, Allied fleets formed defensive lines. Rebel ships arrived from impossible distances. Former enemies stood beside humans because extinction was a poor networking strategy. And on Karvas, inside the Spear's central chamber, Captain Elias Rook finally saw Supreme Executor Vaylor standing before the firing lattice, one hand resting on control throne like a king touching destiny. The charges were armed. The override codes were ready. The distance between success and planetary death was now measured in footsteps. Rook drew a slow breath, because in exactly 60 seconds, either Earth would be saved, or humanity would become something the galaxy had never survived before. Captain Elias Rook had imagined the end of the world many times. Professional necessity made pessimists of people like him. He had rehearsed failure in 1,000 forms: alarms, betrayal, decompression, a bullet in the dark, the quiet horror being too late. But standing inside the Oblivion Spear's central chamber, watching Supreme Executor Vaylor rest one clawed hand on the firing lattice that could turn Earth into a dying memory, he discovered the truth. The end of the world looked ordinary. Cold metal. White light. One decision. Vaylor did not turn when he spoke. I was told humans were emotional creatures, he said, his voice calm as old stone. Loud. Chaotic. Predictable. Rook moved slowly, every step measured, his team positioned like invisible punctuation throughout the chamber. We contain multitudes. Vaylor gave something close to amusement. And yet you came here personally. Not a fleet, not a grand final battle. Just 12 quiet people with sabotage in their pockets. Now he turned. For gold eyes, ancient certainty, and for the first time, fatigue. That, he said, I respect. Rook glanced once at the lattice. 17 seconds. Good, he replied. It would be embarrassing if extinction lacked professionalism. Vaylor almost smiled. Then the chamber exploded. Charges buried in the synchronization spine detonated in perfect sequence. Not enough to destroy the spear. Too much armor for that. But enough to blind it, fracture its command lattice, and rip certainty out by the roots. Emergency siren screamed. The floor shook. Hannah's voice cut through comms. Primary sync broken. Manual override collapsing. Vaylor moved faster than something his size should have been able to move. His strike came like judgment. Rook barely turned in time. The impact throwing him across the chamber hard enough to remind every bone of its contract with gravity. Around them, security forces flooded inward. Gunfire erupted. Dev Malik went down, sealing the secondary relay manually, with his own body still inside the blast radius. The mission had become what all final missions became. Expensive. Rook forced himself up, blood in his mouth, vision narrowing. Valor stood at the damage control throne, trying to force the failing lattice into one final firing sequence. Desperation had stripped him clean. No empire, no banners, just a man trying to drag extinction across the finish line with his bare hands. Rook understood that look. Humans had worn it before. He fired. The shot hit the control spine behind Valor. Not the executor himself. The lattice shattered. The Oblivion spear died with a sound like a cathedral forgetting how to pray. Across Seoul, every warning system went silent. At Station Hecate, Admiral Naomi Sato stared at the tactical board as the red firing sequence vanished. Then, for the first time in 48 hours, she exhaled. Earth still existed. That would have to be enough for now. But war was not over. With the spear destroyed, the Kharad main armada lost its certainty, and certainty was the real engine of empires. Allied fleets struck like accumulated consequence. Rebel uprisings ignited across occupied systems. Supply lines collapsed. Captains who had followed fear, discovered fear, did not navigate well. Within 72 hours, the path to Kharad Prime was open. Humanity could have ended it there. Every strategic model recommended it. Orbital bombardment, decapitation strike. Final lesson. By every cold equation of war, revenge was efficient. Above Kharad Prime, Admiral Naomi Sato stood on the bridge of the Resolve and looked down at the enemy homeworld. Red oceans, stone cities, children who had never chosen empire. The same sky every species looked up at when they were afraid. Her weapons officer waited quietly. All bombardment systems are ready. Of course they were. Humanity had always been very good at being ready. Naomi thought of Eryndor, of the dead, of Elygium, of Captain Rook's team, of every person who had paid for this moment with futures they no longer owned. Then she thought of what came after victory, and who humanity would be forced to become if they mistook revenge for justice. She made the only decision that mattered. Stand down planetary strike authorization. No one argued, because the room had already known. Across every frequency on Kharad Prime, Ambassador Elena Voss appeared one final time. Not triumphant, not cruel, simply certain. People of the Kharad Imperium, she said, your fleets are defeated. Your extinction weapon is destroyed. We have the power to erase your world today. She let the truth breathe, and we will not. In bunkers, homes, command centers, and streets, an empire listened. We remember what it means to look at the sky and wonder if mercy exists. We remember being told survival belonged only to the strong. Her voice sharpened. Your ruler chose extinction. Your people did not. The offer followed. Total surrender. Military disarmament. Release of all enslaved worlds. War crimes tribunals. The end of empire. In return, survival. No second offer. No second warning. In the throne chamber below, Supreme Executor Valor sat alone beneath banners that already belonged to history. His war crest rested in his hands, suddenly just metal pretending to be destiny. He looked at the screen, at the human woman offering mercy from a position where cruelty would have been easier, and for the first time in his life, he understood weakness correctly. It was not compassion. It was needing domination to feel tall. Slowly, he removed the crest and placed it on the floor. The surrender was broadcast across the galaxy. The Kharad Imperium, old, feared, and certain, submitted not to a stronger monster, but to a species powerful enough to stop becoming one. Months later, on Eryndor, rebuilding had already begun. Children ran through streets that had once been kill zones. Former enemies worked beside human engineers in the awkward, suspicious peace that always came before real trust. In the restored Central Plaza, historian Darr watched a young Kharad child staring at a human aid worker repairing a collapsed transit rail. The child asked the question softly, as if afraid truth might hear it. If they were strong enough to destroy us, why didn't they? Darr looked at the workers, at the scars still fresh in the bones of the city, at humanity doing the strangest thing predators could do, helping. He answered carefully, because the most dangerous species in the galaxy is not the one that knows how to kill. The child looked up. Darr smiled faintly. It is the one that knows exactly when not to.